Picture this. You're about to sit down to watch a movie. You've got your drink ready, snacks in hand, and the trailers begin to roll. One of them catches your eye. It's a new movie about a superhero. Oh, nice. The trailer finishes and you think to yourself, I might have to check that out when it comes out. Maybe you do. Then, years down the road, you find yourself looking back and thinking about that film, wondering, whatever happened to that? Why did that leave next to no impact on me? It could be chalked down to a plethora of reasons why. Maybe the movie sucked, point blank. Just wasn't a good movie, so you forgot about it. Or maybe it was. Maybe the movie was pretty solid, but you and seemingly everyone else forgot about it. This little anecdote is partially based on my experiences as a young man surrounding Superman Returns. Oh, what? You don't remember Superman Returns? The triumphant return of Superman, marking his first feature film appearance since 1987's Superman 4? Yeah, see, that's what I thought about. Why would a film as seemingly important as Superman Returns leave no lasting legacy behind? Besides, I guess, having Brandon Routh back for the Crisis on Infinite Earths TV show event? But that hardly counts. Furthermore, I find myself recalling how it's not just Superman Returns that falls into this weird gray area of superhero film. There's quite a few movies that land in this realm of being forgettable but having somewhat of an impact on release. This group of superhero movies that aim for the skies and fail. Sometimes they'll be good, other times not so much. But it goes deeper than just the quality of the film. Let's take a journey today as we go over a few superhero films that land in what I like to call Superhero Purgatory. Never getting that coveted sequel or franchise. Films that often set out to make their mark on the world but get cut short. In this video, we'll take a look at a selection of films that I believe fit in this realm. But just know there's plenty of others that could be described in this way that I'm not going over. And one last thing before we get into it for real, leave this video a like and let me know, what is your personal favorite superhero film? For me, it's tough to decide on just one, but if I really had to, I'd say it's Spider-Man 2 by Sam Raimi. So before we continue, allow me to explain my definition of Superhero Purgatory. Superhero Purgatory is a realm of obscurity that superhero films fall into where they're lost to the sands of time. Not bad enough to be remembered for the memes, but not good enough to leave behind an impact. These films generally aim for the skies but get left behind, forming plans for a sequel or sequels, having a post-credit scene and the like. The quality of these films may lean towards being bad, but it's not always the case and also isn't the sole reason they fall to the wayside. First up on our list is also the most recent example of a film meeting this fate. 2023's Shazam 2. Fury of the Gods. The film preceding this one, 2019's Shazam, was a film that did extremely well despite the odds, introducing a somewhat unfamiliar face. Depending on who you ask, don't hound me on how you knew who Shazam was before this. Go ask your mom if she knows who Shazam is. Get back to me then. Anyways, introducing a somewhat unfamiliar face to the wider world worked out for DC. The film was praised for its solid direction, good casting, and overall being a fun time, marking a bright start for a new face in the public eye. However, it was about the peak of this ride as it all went downhill from there. The first thing that is leading to Shazam 2's fall is the current state of the DCEU, a shared cinematic universe the film finds itself part of. Announced in late January of 2023, James Gunn would be appointed as the new head of DC Films. During this, it was announced that the current canon/timeline or what have you of DC Films is finished. There will be a reboot beginning with a new set of films. There's certainly jokes to be made here, but I will just let this speak for itself. Anyways, the move away from the current DCEU puts Shazam 2 in a funky spot, leaving viewers to feel as though the film is pointless, deeming it dead on arrival. With the DCEU being wiped clean, it is highly unlikely that Shazam will ever receive a continuation of any kind, making it hard for fans to get attached. However, this is not the only roadblock for Shazam. There's more. There is always more, as you'll come to find with the movies in this video. A specific film that was released last year put Shazam in an even more awkward spot. A film that changed the hierarchy of power in the DC universe.
Because the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
That's right, we're talking about Black Adam. On its own, there's a whole rabbit hole to explore with Black Adam. There's a lot that went into that movie, but that's for another day. Just today, I want to focus on the impact this film had on Shazam. The first thing being the fact that in both Shazam 2 and Black Adam, neither character is mentioned. Shazam's most iconic nemesis makes no reference to him in his standalone film, but also Black Adam is not mentioned in Shazam: Fury of the Gods. Were the ill-fated DCEU able to last longer, perhaps the two would have inevitably met. Regardless of that, though, it's beyond confusing that the two exist in their own bubbles, yet within the same alleged universe. Alas, due to circumstances mostly unknown, looking at you, Dwayne, the two will have to wait longer to clash on the big screen. To put it into perspective, this would be like creating both a Lex Luthor and a Superman film, only for the two to not interact, mention one another, or have any sort of impact on the other. Of course, you could compare this situation to whatever's going on with Sony and their set of Venom films, but at least it can be explained away due to the current iteration of Spidey existing in his own universe separate from Venom. Different ownership of the characters and so on. Still not a great choice, but you see what I'm getting at. Shazam and Black Adam both are owned and said to be in this same universe. So, show it. Anyways, I'm getting off track. Let's move on. As of now, Shazam: Fury of the Gods is releasing as one of the final films in the DCEU, and likely the final Shazam film for some time to come. Last thing I'd like to look at is the audience response, and it seems to be pretty mixed. Some claim the film to be a fun time with a heartwarming story about Billy and his Shazamily? Coming together and learning how to be heroes. Others aren't so positive, citing the same failures that previous DCEU films have had. These include the bloated cast, underwhelming antagonist, that same antagonist cutting away in favor of a huge CGI monster battle, and a shocking cameo at the end of the film meant to blow fans away that just falls flat. I haven't seen Shazam 2, so I'm unable to comment on the actual quality of the film, and the same's going to go forward for the other movies I mentioned. Whether I've seen them or not, I'm just keeping things unbiased. We'll see how the DCEU's swan song film, The Flash, bodes, but I have a strong feeling it will tread similar territory as Shazam. But who knows? I could be wrong. Leaping all the way back to 2003, superhero films were still establishing themselves on the scene. Aside from the two DC heavyweights, Superman and Batman, superheroes did not have a big presence in the world of film. Around this time, though, things were changing. The year before, 2002, saw the release of smash hit Spider-Man, which set a new standard for comic book movies. Spider-Man would go on to receive 2 sequels, video games, action figures, and all of the merchandise you can think up. But today, we're not talking about the films that did well, we're talking about the ones that were left behind. Before he was Batman, Ben Affleck was the man without fear, Daredevil. Daredevil would be one of several attempts by Marvel to bring their characters to the silver screen. These other attempts include The Incredible Hulk, Ghost Rider, and The Punisher. And while each of these characters would go on to receive a sequel, tons of merchandise, reboots, all that, Daredevil would be stuck in 2003. There were a few attempts at creating a Daredevil film prior to the one we received. In 1997, J.M. DeMatteis would write a treatment for The Man Without Fear. In a blog post, DeMatteis recounts his experiences writing the screenplay and even includes a chunk of it to read. This is worth a look for any fans of the character and those who are interested in lost media adjacent stuff. In this blog, DeMatteis shares how his treatment made it all the way up to Stan Lee, who gave it his approval. However, things weren't meant to be as Fox wasn't as thrilled. Fox owned the rights to Daredevil at the time and decided not to use his screenplay despite the general positivity around it. Rights shifted from Fox to Columbia in 1999 and progress began to get underway on the Daredevil film. Chris Columbus and Carlo Carle were set to work on the project, with a script being available to read online. Chris Columbus may be familiar to some of you out there, as he directed both Home Alone 1 and 2, the first 2 Harry Potter films, and Pixels. We all love Pixels here, right? These things didn't pan out as Columbia canceled the project, handing the reins over to New Regency. The film would once again begin work, this time under Mark Steven Johnson, who would later direct the Ghost Rider film from 2007. Behind-the-scenes information reveals that the comics were used heavily for inspiration, with Johnson citing the Guardian Devil arc. Progress would carry on, and Daredevil would release on Valentine's Day 2003. Advertising for the film included TV spots, a collaboration with a watch company, and a fair amount of merchandise. A tie-in video game was released for the Game Boy Advance, and that makes my heart weep, as I would have loved to see what a jank PS2 Daredevil game could have looked like. The film released in mixed reviews, though they did lean towards the positive. The biggest boon for Daredevil in the eyes of the critics was his down-to-earth character, portraying a broken soul. I've got to point out this one reviewer on Rotten Tomatoes, though, because he knew something others didn't. So, what happened? Well, the first reason is that Daredevil performed good, not great, and the executives at 20th Century expected much more from the film. Ben Affleck also stated that he would only return to playing Daredevil if he were able to portray the character's darker storylines, which likely caused issues internally. Seeing the more family-friendly direction other superhero movies have potentially scared away 20th Century from adding that much-needed edge. If only they were able to release this a little bit later, then they could have seen the success of films such as Batman Begins. But, oh well. Interestingly, a spin-off film did release starring Jennifer Garner's Elektra, who debuted in Daredevil. This film was critically panned, thus putting a nail in the coffin for Daredevil. Now, this ill-fated film is nothing more than a footnote in the history of comic book films, only being remembered for Ben Affleck's first superhero film appearance and having Evanescence on the soundtrack. It is worth noting that there was a director's cut released which added in content, however, that didn't save it from the obscurity it fell into. And I also want to add this in because I found it funny, but in 2006, Ben Affleck stated that he would never play another superhero again. Oh, Ben. What makes matters worse in this case is that based on my research, Affleck really did have a soft spot for Daredevil. Both him and fellow actor Matt Damon were both offered the role of Matt Murdock, and both were fans of the character prior. Affleck even allegedly read every issue of Daredevil that he could, in order to have a better understanding of the character. But, alas, the man without fear is also the man without another film appearance until 2021. Next up is 2004's Catwoman, which has quite a history to it. Originally intended to be a spin-off film to the wildly successful Batman Returns, this film transformed into a beast beyond recognition, now only being remembered by YouTubers digging up obscure and bad films to go over.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Nothing.
Much like Daredevil, this film went through quite a bit before finally ending up in theaters. The first plans for a solo Catwoman movie came about in 1993, with Michelle Pfeiffer reprising her role. The film was expected to be in the same continuity as the Batman films by Tim Burton. Though, plans didn't last as the film would find itself in development hell, switching hands frequently. It got to the point where the film would have a much darker tone than the 1995 Batman Forever, which caused more dysfunction. Michelle Pfeiffer also became a mother around this time, which led to her dropping out of the project. Various stars were considered for the role of Catwoman, including Ashley Judd and Nicole Kidman. While the film struggled to get off the ground, Warner Brothers was busy trying to release their next biggest thing, Batman vs. Superman. But as we all know, this 2004 release never came to be, so seemingly as a failsafe to cover their losses from Batman v Superman failing, Catwoman was thrown together. Catwoman would be directed by Pitoff, a French director and visual effects artist who had seen success from his 2001 film, Vidocq. No idea how to say it. Vidocq? Vidocq? Anyway, the designated star would be Halle Berry, who had also seen recent success coming off the heels of works such as Die Another Day and the X-Men films. The film would also feature Sharon Stone, showing that the film had no shortage of apparent talent. Promotion for the film was about average, with trailers being shown on television and a unique interactive website. Following tradition, there was also a video game based on the film that was multi-platform. In online spaces, the promotion for the film was met with skepticism. First, it was revealed that the film would not follow Selina Kyle, but a different character entirely. Then, the bombshell of information dropped that this version of Catwoman would have superpowers. Marketing was also heavily focused on her sex appeal as opposed to any other aspect of the character, all of this coming together to lead quite the discourse online. Finally, Catwoman was released on July 23, 2004, and, well, it bombed very badly. The film is considered a box office bust as it only made $82 million on a $100 million budget. Critics absolutely tore this thing apart from nearly every aspect of it. A lack of a coherent plot, dizzying direction, and a complete disrespect to its source material. This quote from the director of the film, which is front and center on the Wikipedia page, should say it all. This film would even be nominated and win a few Razzie Awards, with Halle Berry herself going in person to receive one. To those unfamiliar, the Razzie Awards, properly known as the Golden Raspberry Awards, is an award show dedicated to showcasing the worst films released in a year. It should be noted that it's also incredibly uncommon for anyone who was nominated to actually show up and receive these due to, well, being embarrassed of their film. So while the lack of quality definitely didn't help this film, I can't help but wonder what could have been here. Were Catwoman to receive universal praise, would it still find itself in this gray area? Going based off Daredevil, praise alone isn't enough to save a film from this fate. What could have been the first in a series of films centered on Batman's rogue gallery finds itself in the Superhero Purgatory. It's a bird! It's a plane! No, it's Superman in his first film since 1987! As mentioned earlier in the video, Superman Returns has a spot in Superhero Purgatory. The Man of Steel, one of the most well-known superheroes, is not exempt from this fate. After the failure of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, there were a few attempts to bring Superman back to the silver screen. The first of these was Superman Reborn, which began development in 1995 following the success of the Death of Superman story arc. This film would take liberties with the story it was adapting and see dysfunction behind the scenes, ultimately leading it to be shelved. Another attempt would start up a few years later as Superman Lives. This film would go all the way through pre-production and make a decent amount of progress until Warner Brothers decided to shelf it. There's an entire documentary about the behind-the-scenes of Superman Lives, which covers a lot of info that only came out recently. It's titled The Death of Superman Lives: What Happened, and you can find it online somewhere. Lastly, there was Superman Flyby, which would have released in 2004, just 2 years shy of when Superman Returns would release. Flyby was to be written by J.J. Abrams and directed by Brett Ratner. This project would eventually be cancelled. The exact reason why is murky, but it's likely just due to studio conflict. After multiple failures to get a Superman film off the ground. Get it? Warner Brothers approached Bryan Singer to direct a Superman film. Singer took on the project, turning X-Men 3 over to Brett Ratner. Interesting how that works, huh? This adaptation would follow the continuity of the first 2 Superman films featuring Christopher Reeve. Being a big fan of these, Singer drafted up a script and presented it to Richard Donner. Donner gave his blessing and production went underway. Beginning work in 2004, the film would have 6 separate drafts written by February of 2005. Development went off rather uneventfully when compared to the other films mentioned thus far, with little to mention as far as corporate intervention goes. The promotion for Superman Returns was robust, featuring tie-ins with several brands, a large number of action figures, and the typical video game tie-in. Returns would have a large IMAX campaign, boasting extra footage exclusive to the format. There was even a cross-promotion with NASCAR, oddly enough, with Jeff Gordon sporting the film's iconography on his car. Superman Returns would release on June 28th, 2006, as audiences packed in to see the bombastic return of Superman. Reception was mixed, but mostly positive. Audiences loved the visual effects of the films, as well as the performances by Brandon Routh as Superman and Kevin Spacey, oh my god, as Lex Luthor. Less positive reviews noted that the film was somewhat boring and lacked the wow factor befitting Superman. The film would gross $391 million on a gross $223 million budget, earning the spot of the 9th highest grossing film of 2006. Warner Brothers announced there would be a sequel to Superman Returns that would release in the summer of 2009. However, after going over the numbers, they decided to pull back. Warner Brothers president Alan Horn remarked that the film should have made more money, and that they should have targeted the younger male demographic more. There would be some progress on a sequel, but due to a slew of reasons, it just would never come to fruition. Now, the legacy of Superman Returns is seemingly non-existent. The film is hardly remembered by anyone outside of die-hard Superman or comic book fans. While some of this can be blamed on the less-than-stellar reputation of some of those involved, that's not the entire story. Due to a myriad of reasons, from its melancholic setting, mixed audience reviews, and strange release window, releasing near Batman Begins, which was a fresh reboot for Batman, Superman Returns found its spot in Superhero Purgatory. Moving right along, next is Green Lantern. The second time Ryan Reynolds found himself in a superhero film, but certainly not the last. Much like the other films in the video, there were quite a few attempts to make a Green Lantern film. In 1997, Warner Bros. Offered the opportunity to Kevin Smith, who, at the time, was working on Superman Lives. Smith rejected the offer, believing that someone more suited could bring Green Lantern to the big screen. There was an attempt at creating an action comedy-style Green Lantern film, which would have featured Jack Black in the lead role. This project got canned due to fan backlash, and yeah, absolutely, that sounds terrible. I'm glad. In 2007, Corey Reynolds created a treatment based around the Green Lantern protagonist John Stewart, but was rejected as the studio executives wanted a film about Hal Jordan instead. And I just can't help but wonder why. The final project started work somewhere around 2007, with a lot of work going on in the background. Various directors were considered, such as Quentin Tarantino and Zack Snyder. Greg Berlanti was initially brought on to direct the film, but was replaced with Martin Campbell during the pre-production phase. Actors such as Jared Leto, Justin Timberlake, and Bradley Cooper were all considered for the titular role of Hal Jordan, with Ryan Reynolds getting the spot. Cast alongside Reynolds were some big-name actors such as Blake Lively, Peter Sarsgaard, and Mark Strong. Gradually, the ball began to roll and filming would begin. Green Lantern was initially planned to release in 2010, but would have to move to 2011 due to reshoots. The production of the film would have its fair share of issues, such as actors getting injured, rewrites, and other miscellaneous issues. Famously, Ryan Reynolds has spoken out about the production of the film, as well as its quality. Marketing for Green Lantern was heavy, similar to Superman Returns. Snippets of the film were shown off at San Diego Comic-Con, as well as a sneak peek being shown on Entertainment Tonight. Fan response to these clips was mixed, sparking discussion online. A set of prequel comics were released, covering the backstory of some of the lanterns in the film. 2 roller coasters were also unveiled based around the film, both of which were located in Six Flags parks. Green Lantern released on June 17, 2011, and was met with less than stellar reception. It was ripped apart by critics who bemoaned nearly every aspect of it. The only thing that was exempt from scorn was the special effects, which were agreed upon to be pretty impressive. Green Lantern would make $220 million in the box office on a $200 million budget, and these numbers are, as you can tell, not great. The Green Lantern was a film that had a lot riding on its shoulders, as one could tell based on the amount that went into it. Prequel comics, a video game, roller coasters, this thing was expected to be big. So, when it performed poorly both with critics and in the box office, Warner Brothers had to weigh their options. There were plans for a sequel, as evidenced by the post-credits tease of Sinestro, the most recognizable Green Lantern baddie. But not just a sequel, Green Lantern was going to be the first film of the DCEU. The very same DCEU that is falling apart right before our eyes. Due to the negative reception, Warner Bros. Would treat Man of Steel as the first release under this continuity, completely ignoring Green Lantern. Now, Green Lantern is no more than a joke to most, remembering it for its awkward pacing and being the first big superhero role for Ryan Reynolds. Though, as I mentioned before, it's technically his second. Green Lantern went reaching for the skies, but came plummeting back down to Earth. The last film I'm going to cover is the second most recent film on this list, 2021's Eternals, a film that exists within the massive Marvel Cinematic Universe. Unlike the other headliners of the MCU, these heroes seem to have found themselves in an awkward spot. Picking a rather unique group, the Eternals are a group of characters created by the legendary comic creator, Jack Kirby. Plans for a film adaptation of the Eternals began in 2018. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige announced that the Eternals would make their film debut in the near future during promotion for Infinity War. Development on the film was rather quiet, unlike the other films on this list. Chloe Zhao was announced as director and was told that she had creative freedom with the project. Zhao cited many sources as her inspiration for her take on the Eternals, such as the original work by Jack Kirby, Neil Gaiman's run from 2006, the TV show Ancient Aliens, and Final Fantasy. She stated that she is a big fan of anime and manga and aimed to blend the aesthetic of the East and West with her film. The direction the film was taken was met with mixed reactions as information was released. Some fans supported the decision and believed that Zhao had good intentions, with others doubting her. This would be amplified when a teaser for the film was shown off in 2021. Some claim the footage was too ambitious, with others feeling more excited. Promotion for the Eternals was, honestly, strange. The promotion with any MCU film is massive, but the decisions made are unique. Aside from your standard marketing merchandise like action figures, t-shirts, and so on, the Eternals had a cross-promotion with the luxury car company Lexus. The company created cars that resembled each of the members from the movie, which, yeah, they're cool, but why? Eternals would release in theaters on November 5th, 2021, amidst the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. It would also be released on Disney Plus in January 22 for audiences to view at home. Reception for the film was wishy-washy. Some critics praised the film for the ambitious direction and its beautiful visuals, feeling that the film was a departure from the typical romp expected from the MCU. Others weren't so excited, calling the film bland and boring, remarking that the characters were stiff and hard to believe. The same aspects some took issue with, others found to be enjoyable. Eternals was, and still is, a divisive film. As for how it performed in the box office, it made $402 million on a $200 million budget. And while that's a good performance, it remains one of the worst performing films in the MCU. Though it's difficult to gauge whether this is due to the quality, or due to the pandemic, or a bit of both. So, why did the Eternals do so average? Bad? I don't know. It's hard to say where it stands, as everyone will have a different takeaway from the film. Part of the blame can be put on the pandemic, as it definitely did have an effect on the amount of theater goers. Another common talking point is that the Eternals cast was far too bloated, attempting to introduce a lot at once to audiences. One claim that is easily rebuked, however, is that the Eternals took too big of a gamble by choosing lesser-known characters from the wide world of Marvel. Considering that the MCU built itself off the success of Iron Man, who was definitely not a top-tier hero at the time, Eternals stood a fair chance. Other lesser-known characters prior to their MCU debut include Thor, the Guardians of the Galaxy, and Shang-Chi. You could even make an argument in favor of Doctor Strange and the Black Panther being obscure. Shang-Chi even had a film release in the same year as the Eternals. But while Shang-Chi has held relevance in further Marvel projects, the same can't be said for the Eternals. Their fate is currently unknown, though it's unlikely that they'll be shelved for good. But if anything, it goes to show that even the MCU isn't immune to having a film in the weird gray area of superhero purgatory. Now that we've reached the end, some of you have probably noticed that these films share quite a few traits. Intervention from higher-ups, such as those who own the rights to the property, getting in the way of production. A troubled development, which often leads to a confused or bad final project. A project being passed from one director to another, with entire casts and crews having to adapt. Or rewrites and reshoots causing hang-ups. Sometimes these films will be considered bad, such as Catwoman or Green Lantern, but this isn't always the case. The ties that connect these films creates a fascinating phenomena, leaving them all in the same big spot. These films leave next to no lasting impact on public consciousness despite having some big names attached to them. Big name directors and actors working for months or years on a film, only for it to end up completely forgotten. Doesn't matter whether it's a familiar hero like Superman, or a nobody like Daredevil, they both suffer the same fate. Personally, I always enjoy researching the behind the scenes of films. Seeing what goes into some of my favorite films gives a better understanding and appreciation for both the film itself and the medium of filmmaking. But taking on the films that share a less favorable fate is just as interesting, if not more so. It's important to remember that even when a film is outright atrocious, there was still a lot of work put into it. Not every bad film starts out a disaster. But conversely, with these films that end up in purgatory, they do often have trouble getting off the ground, following a history of complicated developments and rights issues. I'd also like to draw attention to a side effect of Superhero Purgatory. With each of these films, a sort of stigma develops around the characters who headline them. Look how long it took for these characters to return to the big screen. Daredevil released in 2003 and wouldn't have a single live-action project until 2015 with the critically acclaimed show. And the same goes for every character in this video, with a time frame that's roughly about 10 years, give or take. Catwoman in 2004, then 2012 with The Dark Knight Rises. Superman would go from 2006 to 2013, and we have 2011 to a potential 2024 for the Green Lantern. And with the latest entry of Shazam 2, it's tough to say how long it will be before he gets another movie. I'm sure James Gunn and the others at DC will take their time before dropping a new Shazam film. Or maybe not, but only time will tell. One last thing I'd like to clarify is that I don't believe every film needs to be part of some grand MCU-style universe. A superhero film can exist on its own, and that's just fine. With this video, I aim to point out the odd stigma around these films, as well as the fact that nearly all of them aimed for more than they got. Some of these films feature a post-credits tease for a sequel, some of them had extensive talks at further projects, and some of them even did well enough in the box office to warrant a sequel. However, as we can see, nothing. These movies suffer the fate of fading into obscurity at the bottom of a Dollar Tree's movie bin. As always, if you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please take a second to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And let me know, what do you think of the movies I went over? Are there any superhero movies that you can think of that fit this definition? Lastly, if you want to see me cover other movie stuff in the future, just let me know. Any and all feedback is greatly appreciated. It's been Noyah, and thank you for watching.